All right, hey everybody. So I want to kind of go over some of the resonant frequency things with you with the building towers. Give you some ideas. We'll look at your data really fast and then kind of set you up for success on the rest of that. Then I'm going to be doing a follow-up video on your focal mechanisms, the beach balls, and the INSAR stuff that we finished last Wednesday. And we'll go from there. But it's my dad's birthday, so I gotta make this video first. Then I gotta go eat dinner with them, and then I'll come back and make you a second video for tonight. Okay? So here's what I got, and it's kind of hard because, the virtual background makes things disappear. And yeah, my wife's office behind me is a mess, so I don't want to show that without the background. But what I have here, hopefully you can see, is I have the three different length spaghettis, and I'll try to use my chest to show um, different vibrations. But before I do that, I did want to take a look at uh, your guys's data that's right here. So there, I would say there's some interesting results. All right, and so we're going to compare how what I show you, how that compares to this. I think it takes a little bit of practice for sure to be able to hit that resonance to see what that resonance looks like. So I'm going to show you what it kind of looks like right here, and then we can compare and contrast to see how this goes. Normally, I get some averages here. Um, And there are a few groups that look, similar, look like how I would maybe anticipate or in the ballpark. And then I think there's some other things where we just couldn't quite get the resonance happening. So hopefully, after I show you what's going on, we can clear up any misconceptions and then move on from there. Let's see here. Let me stop my sharing. Okay, and then I'll do some drawing and things too, with just a minute. Okay, so here's what I got. This is the long stick. I promise you, this is a long stick. I know. Let's see here. Maybe I can angle this down a little bit more so it's more on my chest. But this is the long stick right here, and hopefully you can see that's kind of the resonance, shoulder to shoulder, going like that. And it looks like it's going pretty quick. Oh man, that's what happens. Looks like it's going pretty quick, and it was. I normally during, when you're shaking like that, it's usually 14, 15, 16 per second, somewhere in that neighborhood. Okay. So that's in the 5 seconds. So in that 5 seconds, it does like 15 or 16. If you guys want to slow the video down and like watch it and count over 5 seconds, be my guest. I don't have time for that tonight, but just trust me. All right. Let's see here. Now I gotta make my, let's see, was that my big? No, that was. Sorry. I think I made two of the extra short ones. I did. So hold on really quick. Now I'm making the medium one. All right. So anyways, next one's the medium one. So I'm gonna wiggle that one back and forth. And hopefully you can see, and man, it's really weird doing this in the mirrored version of the video here. It's really, you can see it's going back and forth much more quickly. It's going to have more back and forths in 5 seconds than the longer one. The longer one has to travel more distance going back from one side to the next, one side to the next than this one. And so because it doesn't have to cover as much distance, right, it makes more back and forths in the same amount of time. Ooh, that was a pretty gradual, smooth one going in there. Okay. So that's the medium. The short one, I know, was super hard for some of you to um, get going. You really, I mean, like I said, no tennis elbows, no arthritis. You really got to get into it and make it go pretty doggone quick. So I'm just going to hold it here because I can't do any other way. And it doesn't quite get the same effect, but oh man, come on, let's see here. There we go. So you can see that sucker is just going back and forth very quickly here. There we go. And you can see it doesn't travel as much distance. Like I can see on the video here, it's going from like my neck to my shoulder, where the other one was going shoulder to shoulder. So it's a shorter distance. And because it's traveling a shorter distance, it covers, it does more repetitions in that same amount of time. All right. So with that being said, hopefully you can kind of see that now. The long one takes longer to go back and forth. The medium one takes medium time to go back and forth, and the short one goes back. Uh, a lot more quickly. So I'm going to share my screen, hopefully to my tablet, which I haven't I tried to use here since COVID, so I think it still works. There we go. All right, so I'm going to share that screen, and hopefully you can see my numbers here. So the cycles back and forth, generally speaking, let's just call this, we'll make it easy here. Generally speaking, let me choose a different color, sorry, something that you can see. Generally speaking, this is going to be like 15, 16, 17 cycles for every 5 seconds. Every spaghetti noodle is a little bit different. The mass of them is a little bit different, so the resonance is a little bit different. But if you do 15 cycles back and forth there, I think for the noodle height of 20 centimeters, or like the kind of the medium size one, generally that goes from about 25 to 30 times per second. So I'm just going to write 25 for that one. You see I'm using cheaty fives. It's okay. But your data should be very similar. And the short one should go back and forth like 35-ish times in that 5 seconds. So to find the frequencies, so how many cycles are there per second? Well, that's where you just take your cycles divided by the time. So in this case, 15 divided by 5 is 3. So what that means is in 1 second, your building is going back and forth 3 times, or your spaghetti noodle, the big long ones, going back and forth 3 times in 1 second. That's what the frequency means, okay? Um, if I'm going down here, 25 divided by 5 is like 5. So that one would be going back and forth 5 times in a single second. And then let's see here, my math is right, 7 times. Oh man, it's a bad 7. And I always do my little European engineering 7 so you don't get them confused with Z's. So about 7 times per second for the short ones, which means it's going back and forth really fast. This is a way of describing that going back and forth really, really, really fast. So that brings me then to the periods. And by the way, guys, you can use your own data. You can, if you have your own data that looks kind of similar to what this is in the ballpark, use that. If you don't have that, you can use this data in yours to kind of show what's going on. So the period then is just going to be 1 divided by that frequency. So that means how long does it take for one cycle to go back and forth? Okay, so in this case, I'm going to get my little calculator out here. I got to do some calculations because I have a decent idea, but I want to be sure. So like 1 divided by 3 should be like zero point 0.3. Yeah, so the frequency here is 0.33 for that one, which means the big noodle goes back and forth once in 0.33 seconds. All right, so once every 0.33 seconds, it's going back and forth. So in 1 second, it's gone 3 times. Okay, so let's see here. 1/5, that's what, 1.25. Let me see here. 1 divided by 5, or zero point 0.2, I knew that. That's why I always check. So 0.2, and then 1 divided by 7 for the last one is, let's see here, 0.14. We'll just kind of round it off, forget significant figures, all that other kind of stuff. Don't really care for this. All right, so what you're seeing here is as the buildings get shorter, right, their resonant frequencies get higher. So that means you need higher frequency waves, waves that come through more quickly at like, shorter periods. So that's what the period is showing here is like, hey, that wave's coming through 0.14 seconds. Every wave is coming through 0.14 seconds. So in 1 second, you'll have 7 waves pass by a single point there. Okay, so this is the important thing to see here is as the buildings get shorter, they are more affected to resonant frequencies, or the resonant frequency is affected by waves that match the same periods. All right, that match the same periods, or same frequency, either one. So that's a really big consideration when we're building buildings. Let me go back to this here really fast. Let me stop sharing so I can look at you. So when we're building those big buildings, and I want you to go back and think of, sorry, I got to reset my brain. If you remember from like 2.5, 3 weeks ago when we were looking at the characteristic of seismic waves when it was going through different materials, hard rock versus softer unconsolidated sediment versus like stuff that had water in it. those waves slow down and amplify when they get into softer sediments. In hard bedrock, they kind of stay small amplitudes and the frequencies are pretty high. The periods are pretty quick. All right. Um, so if we built a building on hard bedrock that was affected, had a resonant frequency affected by small wavelengths, that would probably not be a very good combination. And so why? Well, let me show you. So I'm going to share my screen again. And let's see here. I'm going to go, I think, yeah, this is the right one. Come on. So going back to here, and you're using your Noodle in this part of the video. Let me share my screen sound. Let's see here. Come on. All right, so there's my stereo sound. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip forward to this little video clip that kind of brings everything to light right here.
Period, or resonance, which is look at how buildings are affected by earthquake-induced seismic waves. All buildings have a natural period, or resonance, which is a number of seconds it takes for the building to naturally vibrate back and forth. The ground also has a specific resonant frequency. Hard bedrock has higher frequencies than softer sediments.
Okay, so this is a big thing to remember. Hard bedrock, higher frequencies. Think of it as like ringing a bell. All right, it's going to be kind of a high pitch bing, and the vibrations are going to travel pretty easily. Where the soft sediments, not necessarily so much. And I also want you to take a look at the wavelengths that are down here on the drawing. Let me see. Sorry. Let me take a look at these wavelengths down here at the bottom of the video that have been drawn kind of on this model. You can see in the hard bedrock, the amplitudes are smaller. So like the height of those waves is smaller. And you can see that the periods are shorter. And so remember, the period is the distance from one wavelength to the next. And if you have shorter periods, that means you're going to have a higher frequency because more waves are going to go past a point in any given time. So if you match a building's height, a building's natural frequency, its resonant frequency, with the resonant frequencies that the rocks tend to build or shake at, that could be some bad things happening. So let me show you how that works. Maybe. There we go.
If the period of ground motion matches an
This is not my voice narrating the video, but maybe I should just move my mouth in the box to make it look like I'm saying it.
natural resonance of a building, it will undergo the largest oscillations possible and suffer the greatest damage. Small buildings of 1 or 2 stories resonate naturally at much less than 1 second periods. As 1 second period will affect buildings of about 10 stories.
All right, so there is a rule of thumb happening here. Short buildings resonate at less than 1 second, but here's where it gets interesting with taller buildings. For every 10 stories, that adds about 1 second of resonant frequency. So a 10-story building literally just kind of works out this way, goes back and forth once every second. All right, that's its period. It goes back and forth once every second. So if you have some earthquake waves that are going through that have a period of 1 second, it's really going to affect those taller buildings if they're not specially engineered or specifically designed for those types of things.
For example, a 30-story building resonates at a period of 3 seconds, and a 50-story building resonates at a period of 5 seconds.
So you got that? 20 stories, 2-second resonance. 50 stories, 5-second resonance. So that is something to take into consideration when building these towers.
During the 1985 Mexico City earthquake, the ground beneath the city resonated with a 2-second period for over a minute.
So let's think about this. 2-second period. So a 2-second period is going to affect buildings of how tall? Well, we just said that 20-story tall buildings, so like medium-sized buildings, they would have about a 2-second period. So if the wavelengths from the earthquake are 2 seconds and the building naturally shakes at 2 seconds, when those both match up, when those are the same, that causes the building to go back and forth and can cause what you're about to see.
Thus, medium-height buildings with similar natural periods suffer the most damage, while short, old, weak stone buildings and skyscrapers were relatively undamaged.
So basically, the buildings that were too short, their periods didn't match up with the periods of that were a little bit longer, and so they were fine. And then the big skyscrapers, they didn't match up with the same periods either, and so it never hit that resonant frequency in the building. Therefore, those big buildings were unaffected. So the only things that were really affected were these medium, 15 to 25 story buildings, give or take, depending on, the height of each one of those. And those collapsed. And so that's what they call, you heard them, a resonant disaster. Um, and by the way, Mexico City built on big infills of sediment. So it's a big valley, lots of sediments in there, and that's what was going on. There are ways to engineer against that. That is 100% the case. There are ways to engineer against this, but if, one of the best ways to engineer against it is to maybe not build huge, tall buildings like that. Otherwise, it's going to take a lot of extra money to mitigate those circumstances. And if you think about, I don't know if this has always been in the thoughts process, but think of all the buildings you've ever seen in like Modesto and Turlock. Like we hardly have any skyscrapers around in our neck of the woods here built on this soft sediment. So I don't know if they did that specifically for seismic considerations from the bay, but it's just something to think about in the future. And by the way, we'll talk about some of these California earthquakes too that happened in the past in the next coming weeks, like the White Wolf Fault that ruptured in the 1950s down by Bakersfield. That was a magnitude 7-ish something earthquake. It caused quite a bit of damage in Bakersfield, and also had to do with resonance, along with strong ground motion shaking, but the resonance also was an issue.
That proved to be what is called a resonance disaster, which is how engineers describe the destruction of a building by seismic vibrations at a system's resonant frequency.
So these pictures are like of shaking tables, the giant, huge shake tables that people will build full-size models of, support structures for buildings or even build full-size buildings on them. And these earthquake tables have huge hydraulics that mimic the earthquake waves that go through in a real earthquake. You can literally program them to make the hydraulics go up and down and do the exact same undulations that a real wave does, an earthquake wave does, which is pretty crazy.
It is because of prolonged energy input that the system swings more and more strongly until a structural load limit is exceeded. A key point here is that
All right, and so now this part that I'm about to show you, I'm going to pop out of there and go back to here really fast. So that's these questions right down here, the part I'm about to show you, where it says compare and contrast short, medium, and tall building resonant frequencies. We kind of talked about that in terms of the rule of thumb for how many stories equals how many seconds. All right. Are these similar to your results in your experiment? So you can go off what you thought originally, your data, or you can go off the data that I talked about. It's okay to say, hey, it didn't match mine, but that's probably because it wasn't shaking correctly or something like that. So, be honest about what's going on there. And then those last two questions, number 3 and number 4. So if you wanted to build a building on soft ground, should it be a tall, medium, or short building? What's the evidence? Well, that's what I'm going to show you now. So 3 and 4 kind of ask it from two different directions here.
strongly until a structural load limit is exceeded.
Ooh, and I should say, just like on a swing, the longer that those earthquake waves go through, the more violent that resonant shaking becomes in the building. So if you just have like those wavelengths that are matching at the same resonant frequency of the building's period, um, if it only lasts for like 5 or 10 seconds, it's not going to cause too much damage. It's that prolonged input where it matches, it keeps building and building and building. Just like when you're going on a swing, you got to start off, a lot of pumps, but the more pumps you put in, the longer the effort you put in, the higher the swing can go. That's what happens with these buildings too.
A key point here is that small buildings on hard rock and large buildings on soft sediments may suffer more damage and ground motion effects from an earthquake than
All right, so you got that? So, hard bedrock, small buildings. Why are they not good? Well, look at the periods here. The periods in that hard bedrock are very short. the periods that are for the resonant periods and the resonant frequencies for these buildings is also very short. So short buildings, short wavelengths, those match bad times. Tall buildings, tall wavelengths on soft sediment here. Not tall wavelengths, long wavelengths. Long wavelengths, tall buildings, bad news because they're matchy matchy. So anytime you matchy matchy, that's bad for engineering there. So how do you counteract that? Well, like this.
On soft sediments may suffer more damaging ground motion effects from an earthquake than small buildings on soft sediments and large buildings on hard rock.
Okay, so if you mismatch them, so if you have short periods here on the hard bedrock and you have a building with a resonant frequency or resonant periods that are very long, um, they're going to mismatch and nothing's going to happen. It's going to be kind of like just going back to the boat analogy, like this.
At sea. A series of waves, particularly when they hit broadside, can initiate rolling behavior. The smaller boat is affected by short period low amplitude waves that slap against the ocean liner with no effect.
So you can see those short periods really affect the small boat. Short periods did diddly squat to the big cruise ship here, right? Where vice versa.
Small boats, on the other hand, will ride up and over long period high amplitude waves as the larger boats begin a long, slow rock. Now,
And honestly, that's what it was like in the Loma Prieta earthquake here in Turlock. We had these big, long period waves coming through, and the street was completely, doing like it felt like an ocean. It looked like an ocean, and all the buildings were just going up and down like this boat bobbing over the top of them with not much effect. So that's why we did this experiment. Hopefully, you have enough information to do that. But I like ending it on like this because
sorry,
Robert Butler is pretty
The
amazing.
idea of the boss model is that different height.
But basically, this was one classroom demonstration for him using wood dowels with wood blocks on the top. And you could do the very similar things, but I think it's more fun to play with marshmallows and have you guys figure it out for yourself, even if it's a little hard to do the wiggle, wiggle, wiggles back and forth. Okay? Now, uh, hold on here. Let me pause one thing just really quick. Dun, dun, dun. Oops, hold on. My recording. Where's my recording? I'm gonna pause just for a second. Sorry. All right, sorry, I had to pull up a few things here really quick. So here's California, and I want to show you one interesting way that you can counteract, these different frequencies, and that's using what we call a mass damper. So I'm going to go to the Taipei 101 building, which is in Taipei in Taiwan. It used to be one of the world's tallest buildings. It's a huge, massive skyscraper here. It's a pretty interesting thing. My dog Jasper's going. But at the top of this building, by the way, if you don't know, Taipei is very, very seismically active here, um, which is pretty cool. But in order to keep this huge, giant building upright during an earthquake, and by the way, there's a track for scale, right? The track has 100-meter straightaways. So this is a really huge building. What they do here is they have what we call a tuned mass damper, and it's a 660 metric ton steel ball that's suspended by 8 cables, and it literally is hanging from the top of the building right in here. Let me see if I can get a drawing here. The cables are kind of strong, dropping down from there, and the ball sits in there. This is not to scale, but you get the idea. And so what's kind of cool is when the building wants to go left or right during an earthquake, this mass has inertia and it doesn't want to move at all. And so what it does is if the building leans to the right, the mass kind of pulls everything back this way. Or if it wants to lean to the left, it kind of pulls it back down this way because the mass of the ball doesn't want to move. So it's one way of dampening or making that not move as easily, which is pretty cool. And I did find a little goofy experiment on YouTube. I think it's in Chinese. I don't speak it, but you'll see the demonstration. It's pretty slick here. So let me erase this thing. Oh man, it's been so long with out using this. I forgot where's my eraser. No, that's my stamp. There's that. There's that. Well, how do I get rid of this stinking? Oh, geez. Hold on. Annotate. There's there. Well, I'll get to that in a minute, and you're just gonna see that on my screen for a second. But here's a goofy little example
阻尼器起到关键作用。
where you can see there's a hanging mass here, and it has inertia. It also can have its own resonant frequencies and stuff too. But I want you to see with that shaking here,
当楼体被迫晃动时，
by
摩天
having
大
this
楼里面的
mass
阻
kind
尼
of
器
counterbalance
起到关键作用。
it can keep these buildings standing and counteract the forces that are going on here. So that's kind of an easy way of doing it. There are also a huge amount, and there's got to be, where is the stinking pin stuff? No, there's that, there's that, there's that. Oh, geez, right underneath there. I don't know how I missed that. Gosh. Okay. So anyways, what's really cool about this, the earthquake design of large structures, this is from Oregon State. I can drop this link if you guys are interested. But this goes into deeper details about some things you can do. You can cross brace, which you can see in this one right here. Some buildings, like in San Francisco, are literally built on Teflon pads that kind of slide underneath the ground. So as the ground rolls back and forth, the building can move without bending, and that prevents it from breaking. So there's a lot of really cool things that can happen here to prevent that prevent buildings from collapsing, even if you're in an area where your building height can match the resonant frequencies. Alrighty, so that should be just about it for this little version of stuff. Just make sure you fill in all this good information, take pictures of that, submit that to Canvas, and that's the resonant frequency lab for there. I'll be back in a bit with your beach balls and seismic seismic moments. Okay, see you later. I'm gonna eat. I'll have better thoughts after that.